Hello everyone, this is Gurmeet. Welcome to the Business Analyst training. I thought to record this short video to cover a couple of basic concepts and will sort of act as a recap for you in case you missed any of this session. I will try to cover in this session what a business analyst is, what is the skill of business analysis is actually. Then we will try to cover some basics, that is software development life cycles. What is the importance of software development life cycles? And we'll take examples of waterfall, what goes under waterfall, what goes in the RUP, that is a rational unified process. And then we will also go through Agile. And then we will study Scrum as a framework to implement Agile. So we will try to see different dimensions, different type of models, and how software is developed in using these methodologies. So having said that, let's get started with the basics of what a business analyst is. So, so a business analyst, as you all know, is someone who understands the requirement from a client, collects the requirements, documents the requirements, gets the requirements signed off from the client, and then acts as a bridge between the client and the development team and the testing team in order to develop the requirements. So this business analyst is the person who will interact on a daily basis or on a weekly basis with with the team, with the development team and the quality assurance team to get the software, the IT system developed. So this is what all we know from a definition standpoint. So what we have to realize what a business analyst does, how depth, because in a depth, because it is not just that. Uh, you will get clients who will tell you you have to do something or you have to build something, right? But as a business analyst, your job is not, you're not a note taker. You're not supposed to take just notes, document the notes, and that would not be your requirement. As a business analyst, your job is to actually analyze the requirements and find out what are the real requirements and then share it with the client and get a sign off from them. So I always give this example in my classes. So we all know about Henry Ford, right? In that era when Henry Ford was there, no one would have imagined a car. So if Henry Ford would have gone to a client to ask what they need, they would have told him, okay, maybe you can build me a faster horse, right? That is what they would have given as a requirement. Now, as a business analyst, that is not the business requirement. That is just what the client thinks that he needs, but that is not an actual requirement. So the work of a business analyst is to find out what are the real needs, what is actually going on in the business of the client or what the client is doing. So to put in simple words, uh, a business analyst tries to find out the business problem and hence defines the business requirement. So the business problem here was that they wanted something that can go from point A to B faster. Again, the horses can go up to a certain speed, but they wanted something that can go from point A to B in a faster pace, right? So they thought they needed a faster horse, but that's not the requirement. The requirement is to get something that could go from point A to B faster. It could be a horse, it could be something else, right? So that is the job of a business analyst to uh, unhide the actual business requirements, and then you present it in front of the client. Then client will say, yes, yes, that's what I meant. But imagine someone would have documented need a faster horse and given it to your production team or development team. It would have not been of any use, right? So having said that, in this brief session, that's what I will leave up to you to think more about it, right? So let's get started with our main topic, that is software development life cycles. So as I shared earlier, we will cover these three software development life cycles methodologies, right? Again, the reason for picking up this provides you a good idea of different dimensions. Again, there are hundreds of these methodologies and plus hybrids, right? So this will give you a good standing point, good understanding of what different dimension of your these methodologies look like. Again, each one has pros and cons. So as a business analyst, our duty is to find out a appropriate methodology that suits a type of a project. Each each one has merits, so we have to find out, we have to understand how we can better use it. So starting with the waterfall, I will just say that think about before you go to the waterfall, think about when you buy a home, how things are developed, right? You purchase a land, right? You purchase a land, then you, based upon the land you have, you give some requirements to an architect, right? That you need 2 bedroom or 3 bedroom home, then you need a kitchen. Kitchen should be having this island, whatever it is, right? You give some requirements to the architect. The architect creates a blueprint, get you reviewed, you sign it off, right? And then once you sign it off, it is handed over. You find a construction person, a builder, and then you hand it over the blueprint to the builder that this is what we want to build, and then they actually get started working on it, right? Once they complete it, there is an audit process that happens so that all the integrity of the house is, the structure is good, right? And then finally they handed over the keys to you that this is your home, and you are all satisfied, right? This is what the building process is. So in this process, everything goes in a sequence. Nothing can happen before or after. So it is not like you can create the map, the architecture of the house later. You have to do it earlier. That is the requirement. You have to do it earlier, and then only development can start. And then you cannot test something unless it is developed. So you cannot audit the structure of the house unless it is built. So everything is very, very sequential, very, very linear, right? So each step has to be completed before the other step begins. So we call it sort of waterfall because waterfall only runs in one direction from top to bottom. It cannot go back, and then it's a linear sequential type of a cycle. So the first SDLC that we're going to study is waterfall. It follows the same thing. It's a linear sequential life cycle model where everything follows from top to bottom, cannot go back, right? So that is type of the methodology. It's very simple. Everyone can understand it. It's very relatable, as the example that I gave you of building a home. So when a project is using waterfall software development life cycle, in a very similar way, things follow the same rhythm, right? So we will discuss these are the various phases of a waterfall, right? Requirements, first you document the requirement, design and architecture is done, then development and coding is done, right? And once development and coding is done, quality assurance or software testing is done. Once testing is complete, then the implementation or finally sort of handing over the keys start. And then maintenance means once the handing over the keys is done, then ongoing support, like if there are any defects, any issues. So all these are non-iterative, linear, sequential process that is waterfall. And each phase, I think we will briefly go through it. But again, you can read the notes for more details that I shared. But think about it. Everything is having a formal handoff. Once, as a business analyst, you write the requirements, you gather the requirements, you document the requirements, and then you get a sign off from the client. Yes, these are the requirements, and then you hand off that signed off document or signed off artifact to the design and architecture team. They use that design that business requirement, and they build the designs or software architecture based upon that. Once both the things are done, the requirements and the design architectural output is used by the development and coding team to build the system. So they use that as a process to do the development. Again, everything is going in a sequence. You cannot go one step ahead or one step back. So it is following a linear sequence. And as soon as the development and coding is done, the quality assurance team utilizes the requirements, the design and architecture to test the system, that whether it is doing what it is supposed to do, and if yes, if no, then it should be doing what it's supposed to do, right? If not, they find defects and they get it fixed. Once everything is done, we prepare for the implementation phase, which is sort of putting everything on production or everything, making it live, so that this can be. Right now, it was on the development channel. It was not accessible, let's say, from the outside world. Now, with implementation, you are making it ready so that external people or the client could access it. So implementation is sort of making it ready for the production. So either you have to do final merging of software or integration, or adding like final chain things, whatever it is required, you do it before you hand it over to the client. And last is maintenance support, is like sort of providing support once it is implemented live in the hand of clients, right? If the client is facing any issues, needs support, training, right? Or there's a defect, this client is stuck somewhere and needs the software needs to be fixed, all is covered under the maintenance and support. So again, this session was sort of a wrap-up session. You can again go through detailed notes, what goes inside each phase, and feel free to post any questions that you might have. Again, having said that, now let's talk about what all are the advantages and what could be the possible disadvantages. So I think as the first or and the most visible uh, disadvantage that I would say is that it is sequential or linear. So if anything goes wrong in any phase and you have either gone to the next phase, there is no coming back. So let's say you did the requirements phase, you went to design, you started development. Now someone found out that the requirements was incorrect or misstated, or there is a change in the requirement. There is a high chance of putting the project at risk because you already invested, let's say, 2 months in writing requirements and 2 months or 1 month in design architecture. And now you're changing the requirements, then you have to probably redo both the phases again or to some extent. So it puts the project timeline cost at risk, right? So that is the major disadvantage. There is no provision of changing anything. So in a project where requirements, there is a possibility of changing requirements or requirements are not clear from to start with, we should avoid using waterfall wherever possible, because you are just going to put your project at risk if anything changes, right? Second, or the most, or one of the disadvantages is that resource utilization is a concern. There, as a business analyst, you are just working for the requirements phase, and your part is done or almost done. And for the remaining of the phases, you might be providing support to other teams, but your core work is done after your requirements are done. And similarly, when you are working on requirements, the rest of the teams don't have anything to do unless you're done with the requirements or unless the time of their phase begins. Again, in the modern world, the project managers, they juggle around resources. They try to make sure that one resource is for a particular skill is utilized at multiple projects, so that when one is done for a project one requirements, they can be switched to project two requirements, and so and so. But it's hard to do that. So that is another disadvantage, that is resource utilization in this methodology. So now you might be thinking it's all disadvantages and why we're using it, but there are some very good advantages as well. Since it's a very simple software development lifecycle, anyone can understand it. There are abundance of resources who could be hired easily and are able to start working on these type of projects very easily, rather than other complex methodologies like Scrum framework. It is very hard to find resources, right? Or relatively hard to find resources. Waterfall, it is very easy because it's very simple. Second, it's a very good methodology for short-term projects. So if you're making like maybe a 5-pager website, you don't have to be bothered to go into like complex software development processes. This is good enough because just 5 pages or like a 6 months project, nothing can much go wrong. So it's a good methodology for shorter projects, very straightforward, very simple, and it's a good methodology for the short-term project. Another disadvantage is that uh, let's say you are 3 months into development, right? And or you are 3 months into the project, you just did requirements and design and architecture. You haven't started development, and then for some reason something changes. All you have in hand is a pile of document or pile of architectural documents. You don't have anything substantial. So you don't create something of value until later in the project, right? So that's another sort of a disadvantages. And the client relies on the requirements to sign off. They don't see anything substantial till later part of the project. So unless your implementation is ready, the client don't have visibility what we are building. They just rely on the requirements document to think that this is what we will be getting. So these are all the advantages and disadvantages of. Again, I've listed a couple of them for you to read, but this pretty much covers it. Again, I would again reiterate, never think about that, okay, this waterfall looks like a wrong approach or it doesn't look like a right fit for any project. There are multiple projects using waterfall because of multiple reasons. Again, simplicity, easy to find resources. Then if it is a short-term project, you don't want to get into a hassle of using complex SDLC methodologies. So there are different projects using it, and there is nothing like a good or a bad methodology. It is just how appropriate that methodology is based upon the project you have in hand. So you can go through these advantages and disadvantages of waterfall methodology. So, and you can see also the notes for further understanding this. But without further ado, we should start the next methodology, that is a rational unified process, or in the short called RUP. So since you have gone through waterfall, you have the concept in mind that there will be phases, and in each phase something will happen. So how is this different? So let's go through the phases first. So RUP has only 4 phases: inception, elaboration, construction, and transition. Again, it doesn't mean that what we were doing in the waterfall we are not doing here. Again, we need to have the requirements, architecture, design before we do the development, and we need to do the development, testing, and then transition, right? It's just like they are trying to merge certain disciplines or certain things that need to be done into multiple phases. So they call the inception phase. The inception phase is where the prime objective is to understand the scope of the system, uh, uh, to validate the cost, to basically cost budget analysis, understanding what is the scope, what needs to be built at a very, very high level, right? First of all. So once you have done that, then you also there is a stakeholder agreement that needs to be done. Okay, yeah, this is what needs to be built, and this is how much time it will take, and this is how many resources are this. So I would say sort of a scoping or project management exercise along with stakeholders, I would say, to put it in a simple word. So that is what inception phase would be ideally. So elaboration phase is primarily where the business analyst work, or I would say more often comes in, right? So in this phase, you develop the requirements, you document the business cases, and then you create use cases, use case diagrams, you document all the understanding of the requirements. All those things happen in the elaboration phase, as the name suggests, right? And then project risks are evaluated. So many other things happen, but I think your main work happens as a business analyst, or primarily work happens as a business analyst of elaborating the requirements and documenting the requirements as part of this elaboration phase. The construction phase, as the name suggests, is actually the construction happens or development happens. The testing, some part of testing, test cases are created. The software system is actually built in this phase. Now, the transition phase is it also includes all the final testing, integration work, and actually taking the system to production. So this is sort of the implementation phase in Waterfall, what we were talking about, but it has multiple other things going on, not just implementation. Training, like anything that needs to be having a quality check done, everything is done in the transition phase. So now you might be thinking that if okay, we understand that different phases and their names are different, but still they are doing the same thing, then how it is different than a waterfall? So for that, we have to see a different dimension. So this is how the dimension of a rough looks like, right? So inception phase, elaboration, construction, transition. The key difference here is there is no sort of handoff between phases, right? You can see that each of this graph represents that uh, each discipline or works start at it in a one phase and then peaks out at point and then slows down. But it's not like you do everything in the same phase. It's not like that. Uh, Different team members having different skills start working on different skill sets uh, in different phases. So basically, requirements uh, start working on requirements in the inception phase. You peak out between the inception and elaboration phase, and then it slows down. Right? So it gives a understanding of how your work would be divided between phases. Similarly, test, right? So your main peak is after the construction has happened, you peak out. But it's not like you will just get started when the construction is done. You as a team, as a testing team, will continue to work on maybe writing test cases based upon whatever phase the requirements are ready, and then you will peak out a little bit when you get more chance. But the actual testing happens when the construction is almost done, right? So this represents there is no, I would say, clear boundary per se, right? You start working on things as and when they are ready, and then your amount of work may slow down or increase based upon at what stage the development is at that point of time. Okay. So again, I will share this notes so that you can read about each phase in more details to get more knowledge. Okay. So now, having understood the two dimensions of this phase, it's not just clear cut what happens in inception or elaboration. Multiple things are, as you can see are going on parallelly, right? There is one more level of complexity here. So there is a thing called iterations. So if a project, let's say it's of 10 months long, a project, the work in a project is 10 months long. So in typical waterfall, you will say, okay, I will do the requirements. First 2 months will be requirements. Next 2 months will be design. Or next 3 months would be your development, and then 1 month or 2 month testing, and finally hand off for implementation. Right? That's how you will break up in a waterfall. For if you take the same example, let's say in RUP, right? So in RUP, what we will do is we will break the entire scope of the project in different iterations. Okay, so the iterations would be we will be repeating things again and again. So let's say this is one iteration of the project. So we will divide the whole 10 months work into, let's say, three iterations, right? So you will do inception, elaboration, construction, transition, everything, and then you will repeat it again for that another chunk of things that are remaining, and then you will repeat it again for the remainder of the things that are remaining. So basically, what you're doing is you are sort of repeating the phases again and again in small chunks. So you are creating small chunks of repetition of the entire process, entire phase, all the phases. So what happens is inception, you will start, you will do elaboration, right? Once you are done as a business analyst in these two, you will jump to the next iteration. You will do inception, elaboration, then you will jump to the next iteration. You will do inception, elaboration, right? So what happens in this is that when you're doing inception, elaboration, right? And you are done. Once you are done with that, you move to the next project, and then the construction team starts working on this iteration. And by the time you are done with the next phase, the construction team can start working on the next iteration. So resources are very wisely or optimally used in this construction, and then you have a way to accept changes, because once your first iteration is over, you found out there are some changes, you can accommodate that changes in upcoming iteration, because you have just done one iteration or one small portion of the entire project. And if there are any changes, those can be handled in upcoming iterations or in phases, right? Another advantage is that since the iterations are relatively small rather than doing it all in one stretch, so you can get something substantially, something that client can review after each iteration rather than just having documentation. You can provide something that the client could possibly review and see, okay, what you are building. So that was not the case in Waterfall, because in Waterfall, till you finish all the phases, there was no visibility to the client. And here you are giving a visibility to the client to provide probably review feedback, and that feedback could be accommodated in upcoming iteration. So having said that, that was, I would say, the gist of how RUP is different than Waterfall, and how iterations uh, include running the phases from inception to transition again and again and again. So uh, I would again advise you to go through the notes to read more about RUP. And if you have any questions, uh, you can feel free to post comments. I will be happy to answer. So we are on the final one, that is Agile. So for understanding Agile, I would like to share that Agile is a philosophy, and today we are going to cover Scrum framework. That is a framework to implement Agile philosophy, right? So we have to be very clear. Agile is not a methodology. So I've seen some people write that I have worked on Agile methodology, or like I have experience. That should not be, that is not appropriate to write. It's a philosophy, right? And the reason it is a philosophy, because we have an Agile manifesto and we have 12 Agile principles, which you can read through the slides with the notes, right? So I will not invest time on these principles because they are like too much will be there. So, but since it's a philosophy, it is very easy to understand. I don't want you to remember it. It's just like you have to understand what are the basis of Agile. So I will just go through the four things in the Agile manifesto to give you like a flavor of what Agile is about. So Agile manifesto, the first one is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So it simply states that we should we should prioritize interactions with individuals and individuals and their interactions with them more over just following processes or using tools. Again, it doesn't say that don't use processes or don't use tools. It is saying that interaction with individuals is more valuable than anything else, right? Again, example for that could be for doing something, you have to send an email to someone, right? That's a process that you have to follow, and maybe Outlook is the tool that you have to use. But if you get to talk to someone that this is what you need to do, or this is what you are requesting to be done, that is much more valuable. You can still do follow the process, you can still send the email, but interaction with an individual is highly valued from the Agile manifesto standpoint. Similarly, second is working software over comprehensive documentation. So that is very, very important, and that's why Agile got too much of, I would say, hype also, because Agile says documentation should be like it should be enough such that the system can be developed, and then it says that working software is very, very valuable than any sort of comprehensive documentation, because documentation is still documentation, and working software is much more valuable as per Agile. So that's why you will see when we go to the Scrum that working software is always valued more. And uh, if you see talk about artifacts, outcomes of the Agile, working software is the outcome. Documentation is not considered as an outcome or a product out of the system. Third is customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Again, um, what we are trying to say here is that it doesn't say that don't have contracts or don't negotiate contracts, right? But it says that collaboration with your customer is very, very important rather than holding them on a contract. So it's as simple as that. And we will learn more how Agile honors these things, how it has, especially Scrum, how it honors these ideas, right? Responding to change over following a plan. Again, touching the same point that um, uh, you have a plan, you are following a plan. It's not a bad thing, but if there is change, if there's a request coming from a client to change, you need to have a way to respond to that request rather than just making them hostage and making them have to follow a plan. So, and again, this is also something that when we go to Scrum framework, we will see how these all things are getting fulfilled. So having said that, I will just skip the agile principles. There are 12 principles. I would urge everyone to read through it. It will give you a good idea of what agile is about. And so we will move to Scrum framework, right? So again, this is like a little bit older slide, but these are all the companies who follow Scrum or use Scrum to build their software. And you can see there are giants like Facebook, Google, and big names which follow or use Agile in there, or sorry, Scrum to build their software. So this is just to give you a confidence that this is not something uh, like not very well used. And all these are following these principles and manifesto. So to understand Scrum, this is like sort of a diagrammatical representation of how things work in Waterfall versus Scrum. So let's say in Waterfall, you do requirements, design, code, test, and maintenance, right? So let's say we divide that, okay, 4 months it takes from requirements to test, right? And 1 month you do requirement in Waterfall, 1 month you do design in Waterfall, 1 month you do code, and then 1 month you do test, right? So so this is difference between sequential and overlapping. So in sequential you do it all in sequence. Once you're done with requirements, then you start design and code. That's what we learned about in Waterfall, right? So in overlapping, what it is trying to say is, in case of let's say Scrum, and you can see the again it's hardly visible, but yeah, the color coding. So you can see this is a requirement bar. This is a design, this is a code, and last one is the test. So in Scrum, we divide the whole work into small chunks such that a small little part portion of that work could be done end to end in 4 weeks. So this include requirements, design, code, test, everything done in 4 weeks. So it doesn't mean that it will take more time or less time, but it gives more flexibility. So think about every 4 weeks you have a working software in hand. So in these 4 weeks, you have done requirements for creating those 4 weeks worth of work. You have designed those 4 week worth of things that you need to be designed, and then you have developed just those 4 weeks worth of work, and same for testing. So end of 4 weeks, you are not just building a requirements, you are building small portion of the whole project, and that could be shown to a customer, that could be used, that could be reviewed, right? Versus in a sequential project, you just have a pile of documentation that is a requirement document, right? You don't have anything substantial. Or in case of Scrum, you have a working software after 4 weeks. Now, again, we will learn how when we go into detail that we have to make sure whatever portion we do in each of the 4 weeks or in each iterations, we have to make sure that that could be independently developed and tested, right? So that is something that we have to make sure that we are not dividing the work in such way that it is not resulting in a working software, or we are then we maybe not doing a good job of dividing the work. So we have to make sure that if it's like a let's say 4 month project in this example, again, it should not be 4 months months only, but let's say if it's a 4 year project, we have to do a good job of dividing it into 4 week chunks. Okay. So having said that, this gives you a high level idea of how Agile uh, uh, I would say operates, or how Scrum operates. I would say I should not use Agile actually now. It should be Scrum because this is Scrum framework. So there are three main parts of Scrum framework. There are roles, ceremonies, and artifacts, right? So, and these are very important. Again, from not from just uh, you have to gain experience working as a in a Scrum team, but also terminology is also important if you are getting positioned in a Scrum team. So there are three roles: product owner, Scrum master, and everyone else is part of the team, right? So the uh, Scrum says that these are the only three roles recognized by the Scrum: product owner, Scrum master, and everyone else is part of the team. Again, we are not talking about titles. You can have any title, but titles like senior project manager, business analyst, lead business, and these are all titles. We're not talking about titles. We're talking about roles. So the Scrum says you could have multiple skill sets, but or multiple titles, but these are the rules that the Scrum recognizes. Again, we will come to that in detail. But first part that we have to understand is roles, then ceremonies or meetings. So the Scrum recognizes multiple ceremonies which are important at different stages, um, namely sprint planning. It's the meeting when you plan for a sprint. So to take a step back, an iteration of or time box iteration is called sprint in the Scrum framework, I would say, terminology. So we don't use the word iteration, we use sprint. That is a time box duration when we run all the phases, starting from requirements to test and implementation. Right? That is called sprint. So sprint planning is a meeting. Then daily Scrum is a daily sort of a status meeting in terms of Scrum framework. We will go through in detail. Sprint review is sort of a demo after the sprint is over to the product owner and a couple of other things. We will go through in detail, but sort of a demo after you have done worked on a sprint. Sprint retrospective, internal retrospective for where team understands what went right, wrong, what could be improved. And last one is just sprint planning, release planning, which we can park it for now. But these are all the ceremonies that are recognized by the Scrum framework, and we will go through in detail in a couple of minutes. Last are the different artifacts. So as you can see, product backlog, which is a prioritized list of to-do items that need to be built in the product. It's a simple list, prioritized list of items that needs to be built in a product. That is considered as an artifact. Sprint backlog, similar to product backlog, but is a prioritized list of items to be built in a sprint, in a small time box iteration, right? That is an artifact. And then last but not least, the potential shippable product increment. So you can see no documents, no requirement document is treated as an artifact in Scrum. So that's what I was talking about. That product backlog, sprint backlog, and shippable product or the actual working software is what is considered as outcome or artifact. Okay. So having said that, let's go into the rules in details. Let's start with Scrum Master. So Scrum Master is the role who is responsible to make sure that the Scrum framework, all the Scrum related things, ceremonies, and everything is followed. So he's sort of a person who ensures that Scrum is getting followed. Again, it doesn't mean he's a manager or type of a role or everyone is reporting to him. He's just a servant leader, a change agent. So he's sort of an enabler. He'll make sure that if there are any impediments or any issues in front of the team, he is the role who would help the team to resolve those issues, right? And if there is a change required, either in a process or a tool, he should be the one who initiates that change based upon feedback from the team. So he is nowhere a manager. He is just a change agent, servant leader, and make sure that everyone is following Scrum. But he is not the person who will tell you what you have to do. In Scrum, it is believed that everyone knows what needs to be done and everyone has skill set. They they don't need like a manager or project manager to tell them what needs to be done. They are like, that's not what Scrum believes. So Scrum Master is a role which enables all these things. Right? Again, in the class when I was taking, I think there were people having questions. Okay, what qualities you need to become a Scrum Master? Again, Scrum, anyone could be a Scrum Master. So in a Scrum team, how the differentiation happens is, first of all, people from different skill sets are put together to form a Scrum team based upon the needs of a project. Let's say you're building a website or an app or whatever you're building in the software IT industry, right? Different people from different skill sets which are required, including a business analyst, development people, architects, right? UI designer, whoever is required is put into your Scrum team. So these all people form the Scrum team. Once a Scrum team is formed, then from the Scrum team, one person is given the additional responsibility of a Scrum Master, and then other person is given an additional responsibility of the product owner. So don't think that the Scrum Master just has this responsibility. He could be a business analyst working on requirements gathering and documentation, or making sure every use cases are ready. On top of doing all their normal skill set job, they also could be a Scrum Master performing all these things as enabler, servant leader, change agent, all those things. So this is an additional role that is given in on top of you being a team in the Scrum team. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Feel free to add comments or questions. I'll be happy to respond. Now, talking about product owner. So, product owner is a very, very important role. Again, it doesn't mean that Scrum Master is not, but he acts as a bridge between the customer or clients and the Scrum team. So, he's the sort of a visibility to the business side of things, right? He provides a visibility to business side of things, right? And he is the one who creates or and manages the product backlog. So he is required to always maintain the to-do list of items that is called the product backlog and prioritize list of items. And he talks to client and makes sure that uh, things are taken on priority based upon the client needs, and then he provides all the business information, business knowledge to Scrum team. So if there is any requirement discussion or anything that needs the team needs help in analyzing or elaborating requirements, he is the key point of contact. So that he's the person who will talk to the client and get all everything clarified. So I believe as a business analyst, this is a very good role, at least role progression, maybe after a couple of years of experience, because as you can see, he is acting as a bridge, and I think between business and the Scrum team. And as a business analyst, you also perform the same role. So it's a very good progression for a business analyst skill set. So having said that, everything except product owner, everyone else is part of the Scrum team. So say Scrum team is a self-organizing team. So it's what this is trying to show is in typical teams, it was, let's say, a business analyst team, and there was a business analyst lead, and all the business analysts were reporting to that person. And this is how the traditional teams were formed. There was a manager, everyone was reporting to the manager. In Scrum, it is not the case. No one is a manager. There is no manager required. Everyone is part of the team, and everyone is, it's a flat organization. You can say within the team, there's a flat organization. Irrespective of the title, you all are working towards the common goal of making the project successful, right? There is no manager, there's no one person responsible to do anything else, right? So it's self-organizing team. And then from the composition of the team, you can see that earlier, traditionally, there were like analyst team, QA team, development team, operations team. Now, in Scrum, we create a cross functionality, which means different skill sets are combined to create a Scrum team. That means we call this as a team rather than calling different skill set people as a team. Same skill set people as a team. We call the combination of different skill sets which are required to develop a product or a module. We combine them and we call them team one, team two, or whatever. And then you can see different skill set of people. So this is what the Scrum team is, a cross functional team. Having said that, cross-functional means doesn't mean that everyone has to know everything. It is like, as in this example, like let's say Lisa might be a Java expert, Joe might be a database expert, Fred might be again Java, Jenny might be web expert, and so and so, right? So it's a different composition of skill sets required to complete or required to perform the job that are required for the project, right? It's a cross-functional team, and everyone has a different star quality, and then other things that they can help on. Okay, so this covers the roles. So we will quickly start on the ceremonies. So sprint planning. So sprint planning is the time when, so as a product owner, you will create a product. Your product owner will create the product backlog. You will pick up one pile of the top priority items and put it in the sprint backlog, right? So that meeting, which in which you will do that, is called sprint planning, where you will, as a Scrum team, get together and pick out, okay, these are the things that we have in hand, and you will plan, and then you will define what will be the definition of done. Means like what, when will be considered that these things are done. Again, on top of that, you also do prioritization, you also do estimation based upon the things in hand. So uh, all this happens in the sprint planning. So again, to reiterate it, product backlog has prioritized list of items that need to be developed, right? So product owner has already done that. In as part of the sprint planning, you will pick the top priority items which you think should be done, right? And then you will estimate, okay, how much work is it, a small item, medium item, how many items you can pick based upon your capacity of the team or velocity of the team. So velocity is nothing that how much work you can take and complete in a sprint, right? So you that is called velocity in Scrum, right? So how many items you can pick up as a team if the team remains the same and the duration is also the same. So velocity is how many things could be completed in one sprint. That is your velocity. So based upon your team velocity, you will may end up picking two large items, one small item, and maybe two or three medium items. So that is what happens in the sprint planning, where you estimate things, you pick up things needs to be done, and then you elaborate and define definition of done. That is what happens in the sprint planning meeting. So end of result of sprint planning is you have a sprint backlog of or things that needs to be done in a sprint. Prioritize list of items that needs to be completed in a sprint. Okay. Next is the sprint review. So let's say you put something in a sprint. So again, I forgot to mention a sprint duration of the sprint as per Scrum could be maximum 4 weeks, right? It could be 1 week, it could be 2 week, could be 3 week, maximum 4 weeks. It should not be more than 4 weeks. So if you did sprint planning, you put things in a sprint backlog and you processed it, worked on it for 2 to 4 weeks. After that, you will do a sprint review or the demo with the product owner and sometimes client as well, right? So at a very high level, it's a meeting where you will showcase what you have developed, right? And you will showcase to the product owner. And then based upon the definition of done, the product owner may accept it or reject it, that deliverables, right? So sometimes client is also present, or it's something that product owner can control if the client should or should not be present. But this is sort of a presentation or demo to the product owner from the Scrum team. So that too we covered. So daily Scrum meeting is a meeting that happens within the Scrum team where everyone comes, or it's sort of a stand-up meeting, very short duration, no PPT, no slides, nothing. Just answer three questions: what you did yesterday, what you plan to do today, and if there are any hurdles or anything that you need help with. So everyone in a round robin fashion answer these questions and move ahead. There should not be any discussions in this daily Scrum meeting. Should be just straightforward. Everyone comes to this meeting, answer these three questions, and if required, you can set a separate meeting to do the discussion. But at a high level, that is what your Scrum meeting is. Again, when after this is done, you create a potential shippable product increment after each sprint is over, right? So once that is done, there is a meeting that is called sprint retrospective. That is happened after the sprint is over, where uh, as a team, you discuss three things: what went well, what didn't went well, and things that didn't went well, what you think could be the improvements or actions that could be taken in the upcoming sprint. So as a team, you discuss all together and you document. The Scrum Master documents the outcome of the sprint retrospective and the actions that need to be planned in the upcoming sprint. So that is your that covers all your ceremonies at a high level. Again, I will share notes, so you should go through the notes and please feel free to comment if you have any questions. Okay, so uh, again, you can all read through what is product backlog in detail. Again, it's as you can see, things that are on top of priority, they are more, I would say, detailed. The things as you go deeper, which are not on priority, they are like more vague or more, I think, very high level. As things come on top of the priority, the product owner and business analyst, they start elaborating or analyzing them, and that's how product backlog will look like. Uh, uh, or I would say how will we actually exist, right? Things on top priority will be more clearer, and the things that are on bottom of the list will be more vague or more at a very high level from a scope perspective. Okay. Uh, okay. So this is one of the example of how you pick stories or pick requirements in a sprint, and then you rate them or you estimate them based upon the complexity, right? So you can use simple methodology like rating them small, extra small, medium, large, something like that, right? Or there are some other complex methodologies that are there, like uh, poker. I'm forgetting the name, but planning poker, right? That could be another thing. There are multiple other estimation methodologies that the Scrum team could follow to estimate how much time or effort it will take, and that is how they can accept or take or not take a list of requirements within a sprint. Okay. So product backlog grooming is an ongoing process in which product owner and team collaborates on the details of the product backlog item. And then they arrive to a shared understanding what needs to be done, right? Again, the whole idea is to elaborate the requirements which are on top of the list and then discuss and from product owner perspective, get the business understanding and the team perspective, get the working functional understanding of how things need to be developed. Again, estimation, number of items in the backlog, prioritization, everything is part of the same. Okay. Product backlog is a living thing, right? It should be considered that it's a living thing, which means it's not like a stagnant list. More things could be added after, let's say, every sprint, maybe because the client gave some feedback which needs to be accommodated in the upcoming sprints, or there was some error or things got fallen down from the list and that needs to be accommodated in coming sprint. So it would be like a living thing because things need to be prioritized, reprioritized based upon, and then we are going to accept changes from the client, from the internal team, from the external client, all those things. So it makes it a living thing. It's a living, working thing. Okay. Okay. Again, we talked about the basics. It's a iteration or time box, which the iteration cannot change. It is fixed. If you decided that your sprint is 2 weeks long or 4 weeks long, it will be that much only throughout the duration of the project, right? It should not change in within. And same case is the number of people in your Scrum team should be consistent because that is what how you will be able to gauge your velocity of the team and accurately put things in place or requirements in place that could be implemented by your team. Um, each sprint builds incrementally on the work of prior sprints. Okay, so this is all good. Sprint planning, the work, daily scrum, sprint review, retrospective. I think we talked about it. Daily scrum, three questions. What did you do yesterday? What will you do today? And is there anything your way? So this is what everyone answers. 15 to 20 minutes meeting, quick meeting, so that no one's time is wasted. That is your scrum meeting. Sprint review is Everyone it is invited from the Scrum team, in the whoever is interested in the product, right? And then you show off your product like a demo, no slides, nothing. It's very informal, right? You're just trying to showcase what you have built, right? Sprint retrospective: what did we do well, what didn't go well, and what are the actions we need to take moving forward. So these are three things you will discuss as a team. Again, the important factor here is the product owner is not required. It might when they are asked, then you can join. But as a product owner, you're not required in this meeting. When the team requires you, they can ask you to join. Burn down chart is another important thing. As you can see, uh, in form of sticky notes, in within a sprint, you have, let's say, things that needs to be done, things that are what we are working on, and then things that are already done, right? So it provides you a visual representation of how your sprint is looking like. So sprint, again, in the form, if you see in a graphical format, the burn down chart gives you a visual representation that when you started with your sprint, you have, like, let's say, 10 requirements, right? So ideally, every day, or whatever duration gap is, you should be able to make it to zero by end of the sprint. And this is showing your journey, how you are progressing towards the completion. You're going up, above, beyond what you're going. So it is showing you that, okay, you should be completed these many stories, but you're completing this one or something like that. So it's a uh, uh, it's a visual representation of where you are at, or and where you should have been. So it's a visual representation of the number of stories within a sprint. Okay. So I think we will wrap up with this. I hope this quick, I would say, crash course for all the three software development life cycles and a basic understanding of business analyst would make sense. Feel free to post your comments and any questions that you might have. Thank you so much. We will catch up in our next class.